Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to hit this button, and then we can go ahead and get started.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Maximum effort.
In this war, there's no surrender.
He's out of line, but he's right. Who the hell is Bucky?
You don't like a fair fight.
I think you're wrong. Which part? All of it.
Think you're the only superhero in the world?
Touché.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Rogue Agents, and we got a very special episode. We are joined by the Wills. How are you guys doing?
Hello.
I don't know.
We're alive.
Maybe
We're
there's
making
supposed
it.
to be applause there, so I'll applause myself.
I'll applause you.
There you go. I'm not reciprocating. It was a who blinks first situation, Pagani, and you lost.
Who normally wins that one?
Oh, I always blink first. Shake
I
never
realize
blinks.
You guys probably do call each other Pagani and Schick. That just makes the most sense. That's super funny.
Yep. Yeah, it's always weird when somebody uses a Will name. Typically, if they say Will, they're always referring about Pagani, but I still get confused from time to time. So
See, but I have the opposite opinion because I'm like, if they say Will, they're definitely talking about Chick. So
I know.
now we're just all very confused.
Yeah. It's not a good look to walk into a room at AMG and shout out Will because you won't get a response. Like
Get
we'll
some
just both
dirty
ignore
looks.
you, thinking you're talking about somebody else. Like
Sounds like a wonderful time.
Always an adventure.
You obviously didn't know how to handle this.
Well, let's go ahead and get started with this. Yeah, I just want to say this episode will be very different from normal. We're also very excited to have you guys on the show. So let's go ahead and get some real quick questions because these are always fun with developers. I don't think I've ever really heard anybody ask you guys before, but like, what started your journey into like miniature gaming?
After you.
yeah,
Shake.
see, I was waiting for you to we were waiting for somebody to blink. I figured Pagani would do it. He did, but in a different way. So I know. So for me, I think like the real roots of miniatures gaming go back to when I was like a real youngin' and I used to build model airplane kits with my dad, who was super into it. So that was like one of our father-son activities that we could do. That wasn't me getting yelled at for holding a flashlight wrong. Which I think like, you know, most dads and sons have a similar relationship. So that really got me into like the fact that you could build things and you could make these scale replicas. And I thought that was really neat. And then while I was wandering one of our local bookstores in the mall when I was like 9, I saw a box for classic Battletech. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think at the time it was like Battletech 2nd edition because I'm that old. But I just thought it was super cool that they had these little like scale robots that looked awesome. And I was like, oh, and then you get to paint them. And that's really interesting. So I managed to get that in my Easter basket. And despite everything, I was able to play it pretty close, I think, but I don't really remember. I just know it was, we had a lot of fun filling in little circles over and over again.
Lots of little circles.
Yeah. I abused a lot of copier privileges from different places that my parents went to so that I could print out all of my little like data sheets. And then from there, I got introduced into, I think like most people, you know, Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy right around the 2nd edition for 40K and 5th edition for Fantasy, I think at the time, through my local gaming store, which I was buying Marvel Overpower cards from because I was super into that trading card game for anyone who played that. It was a pretty fun game. I don't know that it would hold up at all, but I still have all my cards in my garage. So, Pagani, if you ever want to give it a try, we can do it. There's a whole bidding system and, you know, attaching cards. And I know for a fact because I looked at the rules, I don't know, like a year ago that I was like, oh my God, I was playing this game completely wrong. Like I did not understand how to play this game.
Of course. That's how
And there
it
was a
works.
group of like 12 of us who were playing throughout middle school at the time. And like, but we were not playing it right at all. And I was like, this makes so much more sense as to why this game seemed weird. Because it was played in matches, but we didn't understand that. We thought it was just played like you go once and then the game's over. And so it was like, why would I attach cards here when I could just play this? And yeah, it was bad. Anyway. But so they were like, hey, look at this. This is like, look at this new game we just brought in. And I was like, oh my gosh. And they handed me a free catalog. And at that point, I became their best customer for the next 12 years. I actually wound up working at that store as well as the miniatures guy, and running all the tournaments and everything. But that was kind of it. It ticked a lot of boxes for me in terms of like my love of hobbying and building. And then I got more and more into painting as time went on. And that became like a really nice distressor for me in my life as I went to college and everything else. And just, games in general, I've always been a huge fan of tabletop games, but miniatures tick a lot of different boxes that make them kind of a complete package. So that's how I got into it. It was just little baby steps into something that then became a lifelong kind of passion and then career, oddly enough.
Worked out. That's
It did.
you there, Hyper Viper. My God.
Sorry, what?
Like
Your
moving
water
us or
bottle's as big as
something.
you are.
It was this transformation sequence,
It's a gallon. I love it.
Yeah, for me, I actually have a vaguely similar story. I saw my family went on a vacation in France, and I saw the like historical museum of Napoleonic stuff, and I had this giant diorama where they had all the little French guys running around fighting the English guys and stuff, as the French and English do. And they sold little mold kits, and you could bake your own little pewter miniatures and stuff. So my brother and I got into that when we were like way too young to be handling molten lead, but that worked out. Nobody died, so cheers. And then my brother picked up some BattleTech. I never really played that, but it's kind of funny. Shake, kind of like our first ever thing was BattleTech. And then, gosh, I don't know. We moved into like Mage Knight and War Machine and Warhammer and just all sorts of different things. And yeah, I played a lot of card games, a lot of board games, a lot of miniatures games.
I just have to
was always surrounded by it.
I just have to say I haven't heard someone say Mage Knight in a long time.
Yeah, this was 1.0 Mage Knight, not the board game, like the minis game and all that kind of stuff. So
I remember my dad had all that stuff. That was like one of the first games I played too. Oh yeah, because we played Mage Knight, and then my dad got into War Machine actually, because I want to say Pagani actually gave him the beta test game.
Look at us now.
He said somebody in a beard and a hat, and like for some reason that seems like it would be you.
That describes so many people at any gaming convention. Though,
It's true.
Well, it was
basically been like, he's that guy with the face in the movie. Like,
I just like to think that it's Pagani's, and I feel like I have like a
connection.
Yeah, sure. But I was at the Game Matrix downtown Tacoma, so somewhat local. So I could think it's possible.
I think it's a beautiful story. It just means Pagani can't tell you you're wrong because he doesn't remember.
And then I can't say that I'm wrong either because it was my dad and not me, and now it's all hearsay.
Exactly. So
it's just true.
So just stick with the story. This is how myths and legends become what they are, right?
Absolutely. Oh,
Mage Knight was the one that was like blind boxes, where like you like had to buy like a pack and you didn't know what was in it, and like there were commons and uncommons and rares. Yeah, that game was really fun until we had one guy who dropped like way too much money on it and joined our group and was just like,
magic
"What if I had all the rares? What do you guys do against this?"
Oh yeah,
because Mage Knight
collectible games.
Mage Knight was before HeroClix, wasn't it? Isn't it what led to HeroClix?
Yeah. Yeah, Mage Knight predated HeroClix by a few years, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I remember when Mage Knight came out in the store because it was great because a lot of people really discovered miniatures gaming in the store through that. But the store owner at the time was like, "Hey, we just got this thing in. It's really cool." And I was like, "Oh," and he's like, "Yeah, it's a miniatures game, but it comes pre-assembled and pre-painted." I was like, "I don't want it."
That's not why I'm here.
Yeah. 15-year-old snarky me was just like, "No," and he was like, "I understand," and I was like, "Okay," and that was it. So I had a lot of friends who played it, but I just refused. Like teenage me, it was just like, nope. It was a lot like when people are like, "You should listen to this new band." They're like, "Oh, what kind of music is it?" "Oh, I don't listen to that," and you're just like, you're done, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's
Oh,
move on to the next one. We got when we started the show, we had a poll to determine which of us was which rogue agent. We also included Punisher because there's three of us. That'd be fun to have you guys say which rogue agent you would be. But I just had a thought that'd be more fun for Pagani to pick for Schick and Schick to pick for Pagani.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
Schick is definitely Taskmaster.
It's good. It's good. He knew I was gonna pick that anyway. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that totally fits. I've made a career out of watching other people's moves and then replicating them myself. But better.
and
see.
training other people, right?
Yeah, and training other people harshly, like a taskmaster. It's true. Yeah, so what would Pagani be? Let's see. I mean, I feel like Pagani is probably the Punisher. He has a very take no prisoners kind of angle to everything. Like, if I tell you, like, if I'm just like Mage Knight is not for me, and I walk away from it, that's kind of like where it ends. But Pagani will break down why Mage Knight should not be for me, him, or you in very explicit terms. You know, he.
I have opinions.
Yeah,
Strong
he has
opinions,
very strong opinions, very strong convictions, and he's got the firepower to back it up most of the time. So I'll give him Punisher.
Fair enough.
He also has no loyalties beyond to himself. Too.
What?
I've seen him. Like, just to be fair, he's not very consistent. Like, I've had him come in and just deride something completely about how it's all terrible, and then 6 months later he comes back. He's like, "Have you tried this thing? It's really good. I was wrong before." He'll admit that he's wrong.
I was wrong.
But the conviction never really changes. You know, much like every once in a while, Punisher won't punish people because he's in like a Spider-Man comic, and you can't do that in those runs.
The writer, yeah.
So all of a sudden he's like, "I'll let him go this one time." You're like, "No, you won't." That's very Pagani.
I'll be back.
He'll fit the maturity level of the storyline that he's in, basically.
Fair. All
I
right.
like that explanation more than me.
I mean, this is great because it's like, oh, Schick's Taskmaster, done, cut and dried, no question asked.
Yeah.
Oh.
Nailed it in one. Also, one of my favorite Marvel characters. So to be honest, like, it's great that it also lines up with me.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to one more fun question. That'll be, who is your personal favorite character from the comics and currently who we have in the game?
Woo! Now Pagani gets to go first.
Got him.
I think it's gotta be Magneto, right? Like, I think Magneto is super cool in the comics. I haven't read a ton of comics, but of the ones that I have read, Magneto stories are always really fun and interesting, and I don't know, I always like that, like, anti-establishment story arc and all these things. And Magneto is very, and then of course I love him in the game as well. Great miniature, great rules.
I think he's great. He's fun to play against. Oh,
he feels right.
Yeah,
he's a cool guy.
Based on Schick's shirt, I'm gonna bet the first word of the character name is Captain.
Is Captain? Man, I don't know. I am wearing my Captain Marvel digs right now, and she is a great character. That's tough. Like, there's spoiler alert, there's a little bit of bias that goes in a lot of times when it can be fit in when it comes to picking characters for the game, because you often gravitate towards your favorites, like Taskmaster. But Marvel's also just got such a breadth of incredible storytelling. You know, there's a lot of runs where I'm like, I don't like this character, and then you'll read a specific run from a creative team that takes the character in a really great way, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, these are my favorite now. I love
the best character, yeah.
This is the best character, you know? And that's why it's always like, where should I start reading? And everyone's like, this run from this art, from this creative team, because it's the best one. Ignore this, it gets bad. Like, I love Spider-Man, but I would never in a million years wish upon you to go read the original Clone Saga. Like, just don't do it. It's not worth your time.
It's so worth your time. Go read
it.
Clone.
Is not. It's not. It's not. And for whatever reason, you know, like, there are people who do love it, but it was not for me, and I would not recommend it. It's just weird. So let's see, favorite character. I think one of the ones that I was most excited to get to do and bring to the game, of which there were many, was SheHulk. For me, SheHulk was I think SheHulk, for a lot of reasons, and especially as I get older, the more I appreciate everything that was done with that character. Even in like the original runs, like it it was such a great kind of like underhanded jab at sexism in comics and the way that some characters were treated, and like it was funny, and she fourth wall broke for like she was one of the first fourth wall breakers way before Deadpool ever did it. And the stories have just kind of like expanded from there, and I think creative teams have done a lot of really cool stuff, from obviously the iconic Dan Slott thing, where it was basically Ally McBeal meets She-Hulk, which was amazing, like superhero lawyer, to the Savage She-Hulk, where she became, she lost control and she became a very different kind of like hulking character. And so like, I think that is a character for me that like has stood the test of time, similar to Spider-Man. Spider-Man's my cheat. I mean, I have a tattoo of Spider-Man on my arm now. So I just be like, Spider-Man, done. Right. But yeah, I think She-Hulk, she was one that I was super excited to bring into the game for a lot of reasons. We got to do a lot of really cool creative exploration with her miniature and her sculpt, and kind of like define a little bit of our own Crisis Protocol She-Hulk, while going back to a lot of the classic looks. And Hulks are fun to design, but also terrifying because they just break so many of the core concepts of the game with their no injured sides and being high threat, and what does that mean, and how do they how do they balance all of that. So they're typically a fun design and development challenge that we have to go back and forth on. And so I think that I'll pick She-Hulk today, but if you ask me tomorrow, I'd probably pick somebody else.
All right, sounds good.
Which She-Hulk did we get? Because if we get characters that are in like a bubble.
Yeah, so the She-Hulk, the main design of She-Hulk, it's definitely like right around that Dan Slott run to up to like when she's kind of transferring over into Savage, following her coma and stuff, after Civil War II. And like, so that was kind of the inspiration. Like one of the big things we wanted to do is we really wanted to take, there's some really amazing like variant cover art and stuff where, the classic She-Hulk, she's very lean. She's tall, she's muscular, but she's a little more CrossFit, like lean CrossFit, like what do I want? A track and field star. And we wanted to push her more towards the bodybuilder, like super strong CrossFit. So we looked at a lot of CrossFit like athletes and female like bodybuilder like physiques and stuff. And there was a lot of good variant art from comic covers and stuff that had been done throughout the Marvel run from artists who had kind of like bulked her up a bit more. And we wanted to play into that like super powerful, like strong weightlifter physique, and just kind of do a little bit of a different like take than the true classic, which I think is iconic and really awesome. But we thought it would be really fun if we were like, yeah, let's make her look like she can bench press a truck, right? Like let's get that muscle definition, get her a little bigger. And we played with that in the rules too, like she's definitely a bruiser, and she's got some really good throw mechanics, and the way that she can get stronger based on her intensive weight training rules and things like that. We're kind of like leaning towards the fact that she is hulkish, right? She'll go up and she'll just punch you right out.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Sweet.
Let's move on to the next thing that we have. So basically, something we do on our episodes, we call like the challenge of the week, where we take a set of models. Like last week we did Ant-Man. No, last week was the listener question one, or listener one, where we did basically stack a condition team, trying to get stagger every single round, and basically build a list revolved around something goofy like that. We've done stuff where try to encourage people to play characters that don't see a lot of play time. We've done stuff with like play Sinister and Force Extraction and Cloning Banks, Omega Red. I'm trying to get like the real fun ones. Wolverine and Colossus with Fastball Specials back when he first came out. But I wanted to front this one to you guys. Is one of you guys can come up with a challenge of the week for this week for listeners to build a creative roster.
Ooh.
I haven't seen a ton of this running around, but I love in playtest I played a bunch with Blade, doing sort of an all bleed list. So you have like Blade and Venom and Hela and Winter Soldier and all that kind of stuff to just like get bleeds everywhere, and then a bunch of characters that work well with bleeds, which is Blade and Hela and stuff. So I like that as a concept, and you can do it and affiliate Midnight Suns, and I don't know, it was effective in playtest, and I always really enjoyed that.
All right. Well, there we go. We got challenge of the week will be Blade. All right.
Blade and
Bleed.
bleed.
Blade and bleeding blade. All right. All right. Let's go ahead and get on to what everyone's here for and some big question topics. So let's start off with one of the big things that I've been curious about when it comes to the development of MCP is crisis creation. I think Gamers Guild did a little bit of this with you guys, but I kind of want to go a little bit deeper. Let's start off with what is the big determining factor for threat value for a crisis?
We just randomly pick. Don't lie.
No, we don't. Well, at the start, yeah. I mean, we kind of do, right? We do randomly pick it, but as we play the crisis more, you kind of get this idea, right? Like, if it's a secure crisis and there's 5 points on the table or something, you need more characters on the table to really be able to play that crisis. So that will sometimes like push up the crisis value a little bit, the threat value. If there's only 2 or 3 points, right, you can pull it down a little bit. How many tokens are there to pick up for an extract? How many people can hold tokens, right? Can you only hold one? Can you hold multiple? So it's sort of like how do you interact with the crisis itself will sort of determine like how much threat do we think you need on the table to play it effectively, is definitely part of it. And then there's also things like what kind of teams do we want to be good at this, right? Do we want your big bruiser teams of like 3 6-point miniatures or characters on the table at the same time? Cool. Well, if we want that kind of team to be good at this crisis, you have to have enough threat to field that kind of team.
Yeah.
Or if we are like, we don't want these characters to be good at this, and this could be completely from a thematic perspective too, right? Like this isn't necessarily just a game mechanic thing, but if like we're making a crisis that is centered around street level characters, and we want them to be good at that, we want you to play the street level characters, we're probably going to have a lower threat value for that kind of stuff as well, and try and build around that. And you can change the crisis itself, or you can change the threat value to really work for that. So we start by making it up randomly, and then we do stuff.
Dial in. Yeah, there's a little bit of like an element of, it's not completely random either. A lot of the times we'll go in with an idea of where we want the crisis to lay out based on the number of other threat value crises that we have. Because, well, we're not trying to create parity between all of the crisis values. That's not the point. We do want there to be, enough options that you can conceivably cover every threat value currently in the game in your secure extract deck, right? Like if you want to play at the 17s, that's really easy. If you want to play those bigger, like wider rosters at 19 and 20, okay, let's make sure that there's a couple of options for those on both sides. And again, it doesn't always mean that at any point in time that all of those numbers are going to be covered across the decks, especially as things rotate out or, we have to ban or restrict something because it proves to be problematic to the game, which obviously has occurred. But we do take that into account too, right? Like if we're between, well, this could be a 15 or 16 crisis threat, we might go back and say, okay, well, which one do we need more of, right? Is there a value that is more important? And if it's all the same, when all is said and done in terms of the gameplay portion, which is the most important part, we will make that choice based on kind of like the field of other threat crises as well. But like Pagani said, it's very much about what are the goals of the mission itself, like what are our objectives that we want, and then how do we make sure that it effectively synergizes with all of that stuff as well. So
awesome.
There might not be much to it, but same question with shape, basically. Like, what's the big determining factor for shape?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very similar question, right? Like, what? Obviously,
Also
if you
random.
don't have starts random, no, actually, that one definitely does not start random. There's always like a basic idea of what you're trying to do with the crisis of the scenario, right? And it needs to work inside of that. But the the idea behind it definitely plays into what type of lists do we want to be good at this crisis, right?
Mm.
What characters do we want to emphasize? How do we want players to move around the table? That kind of thing, and all of that is taken into account for the shape picked.
Kind of a follow-on question, I guess.
Sure.
Does it ever come into consideration like, oh, we want like X affiliation to feel really good on this scenario, or is that never really something that comes up?
That is definitely a thing. Yes. If you look at Inhumans, right, they're all immune to poison,
Yeah.
and then the Terrigen Mist scenario, which is Inhuman, like that's what makes Inhumans is Terrigen Mist causes poison. So we definitely have some things like that. It's certainly not all the time, and everywhere, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely times where we play that stuff. I mean, Gamma Shelters is one of the first kind of looks into that as well, because it's a scenario that causes damage if you're not within, the Gamma Shelter. It comes with Hulk, who has a super high damage cap, right? So taking 1 damage around is not really going to do anything to him.
Yeah.
In the general scheme. So he's able to kind of like run around outside, not be in the Gamma Shelter, and be largely okay. Whereas a character like Black Widow or something like has to be next to the shelter. It's going to be really bad for her. So there's a little bit of theme baked into some of that stuff from time to time where it makes sense.
Yeah, and you've also got the Dark Dimension portals, right? Cause Incinerate, Dormammu's immune to Incinerate. So you've got little thematic things kind of built into those that I think, and we just talked about the past 2 times, like where does the origin of these things come from, right? I think that all comes from theme first, usually, and then just gets built into the game rules, whether it be through the character rules or through the crisis rules.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, all of the crisis cards start, the very beginning of a crisis card's journey into becoming a card is what moment in Marvel, what story arc are we trying to tell based on the characters that are there, right? They should always work together with the characters that you're kind of seeing them bundled with or paired with, to tell that kind of like, to let you tell that version of the Marvel story. So, Dormammu and Ghost Rider with like demon portals and stuff, right? Like having that kind of thing like tie in together with the Incinerates. A lot of it comes from the initial origin, which is where it's pulled from in the Marvel pantheon of stories. And then from there, it's not like we're just like it could work the other way. You could just simply say we want a D map that has objectives that do X and they score Y, and then like slap the theme on it. But that becomes a lot less, I think. Anytime you start with mechanics and then move to theme, it never feels quite right,
Yeah.
It's like putting the jelly on the bread first and then putting the peanut butter on. It's the same sandwich, but it never tastes quite right.
You're about to start a fight, I think.
I'm a little bit on that already. Yeah, I'm kind of like, do I agree with that?
If you put the jelly on first, the bread gets soggy. The peanut butter stops the bread from getting soggy, which then makes the sandwich experience just better.
But what if you toast it? Then it can't get soggy.
That's not true
Well,
at all.
exactly.
That's not true.
There's a third answer. There's a third answer here, guys, because if you put the peanut butter on the bread first, it also means you're putting the peanut butter knife in the jelly, and the peanut butter doesn't need to be refrigerated, but the jelly pretty much does. So there's a secondary reason to approach it that way.
You're saying you don't put the peanut butter and the jelly in one jar and then like
shake them up.
My dad made me a sandwich like that when I was like 5. It's like the first time I remember it, and I was like, "What is this miracle you've created, Dad?"
You've forgotten
it's like
your
peanut
ways.
butter and jelly, but it's not. It's just one spread.
So
I don't know why that's gross to me, but it is.
Don't knock until you try it.
So I gotta ask, if you're talking about peanut butter and jelly though, and you're saying peanut butter on one side before the jelly, but what happens to the other side of the bread?
No, you have to peanut butter both sides of the bread, and then the jelly goes in the middle.
I want to make sure I was following you there, because that's exactly how I do mine. Because I agree, I don't want soggy bread. Like it locks in the flavor.
Exactly.
I don't think I've eaten a peanut butter and jelly since high school, so I'm kind of just talking my ass.
You're missing out.
You're missing out.
It's time to go back to the classics. But yeah, so theme is like, and this comes down to everything that we design for Crisis Protocol. Theme is always the start, right? You don't start with a character. You don't start with character rules before you know exactly what theme the character is trying to hit. You don't start with a crisis before you know what theme the character is trying to hit or what the mission is supposed to do. because that theme really informs everything that you need to do in the rules.
Yeah.
And again, trying to kind of like slap a theme or a skin on something that's already designed and may not be a perfect fit. You can just tell. And personally, people can argue with that because it's subjective. But from our design approach, you always start with what's the theme, and then you make the rules bend to hit the theme. And that, I think, also makes for a more creative and interesting end game rules result too, because you have to be a little more creative and flexible in terms of what you're trying to do and how you accomplish that. And I think that also shows in the end result, right? It's like, oh, this feels different. This feels unique or interesting, as opposed to I just want it to do X, and then we add a little bit of like fluff on top of it to make it sound like it's trying to tell a story rather than telling a story and going through that unique path that everything does. And Pagani's just sitting there being like, and this is why I hate you, Shik. Because I just want to make the rules and not have to like do the windy river thing.
It's great. I just get handed a windy river and I'm like,
okay,
give me an inner tube.
What do I make with this? I think it's super interesting because like ever since the game came out and you guys started talking about the game more publicly, you've been very big on like we're here for like the theme. We want to make those cinematic moments in games, and it definitely shows with like that explanation of it. Like this is why it is this way because we want you to be playing a comic book. You want to play out that story. You don't want it to just be a rules thing, because then what makes you guys different than any other board game out there? Like that's the cool part is it's based on thematics, not the rules.
On that note, thank you so much for creating the concept that lets me throw like trucks and cars at my friends. It's so fun.
It also sells the game.
Well, that's secondary to my enjoyment.
Fair.
Yeah, throwing terrain was something that like even when I first got the call to like dive into this and started doing the game design and stuff, it was like, okay, what are the key aspects of Marvel? Like what makes a Marvel experience, right? And I think point 2 was terrain has to be destroyed and be throwable, right? You have to have interactive terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a real big focus on like making sure that was very straightforward and easy to understand, but baked right into the core of the game. The other one was the power and like the ebb and flow of storytelling, which is derived very heavily from my love of fighting games as well. Like, having
meter. Oh my god!
having that meter is like it's so important to interesting choice and like, but in the terms of Marvel, it also like that resource makes so much sense because it mimics the way in which we see hero characters. Mostly villains don't typically work; they kind of work opposite. But for game purposes, we just make everybody work the same. But your hero never starts out superpowered. They have to do things, take damage, deal damage, have the odds stacked against them until they finally hit their peak potential. And then you have that amazing like sequence where they take everybody down and then they kind of like they ebb back down. And going back to theme and everything, it was just like that. It was such a perfect way to make the narrative appear on the tabletop in a natural way that players then got to control and manipulate. That was point 1. And then I think number 3 was like, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad it's not true line of sight.
Yeah. I think you get it's an interesting, line of sight. We're going like way off book here, but line of sight is it's a super interesting debate, right? Because I think when it comes to like Crisis Protocol, we always talk about your complexity budget, right? You get so much in a game. You can make that budget whatever you want, but the higher the budget, the less wide appeal it has, right? Like the more people have to really be willing to get into the system and understand it. So like if you wanted to create a complete simulation on a miniatures tabletop, you could probably write those rules, but I think you'd get like 10 people in the world who could A, understand them, and B, want to play that way, right? Like everybody has their own kind of like level. But when you look at something like, Marvel, what are the important elements to Marvel? And I go back every time somebody always is like, it doesn't make any sense that anybody can climb a 5-story or an entire apartment building just using the short movement tool. And I'm like, okay, when somebody finds me the comic where Crossbones spends the entire book running up the stairs so he can go fight Iron Man, I will listen to this argument, right? Like
Oh.
I will genuinely like take this into advisement that maybe I'm the one who's wrong. But until that happens, right? Like it doesn't matter. How do the non-flying characters always wind up on top of the skyscrapers without us having to watch them like hoof it up the stairs or sit in an elevator, right? It's not important to the experience. The flip side to that is like if you want to make a more realistic like mass army game or something that is trying to really deliver on the premise of like you have to, when you poke your head around cover and you're not careful, it's going to get blown off by a sniper. Okay, let's start talking true line of sight because it may not be my favorite, but now we're talking theme, right? And this goes back to theme. What's important to the experience and what is the game trying to deliver? What's the story it's trying to tell? And I think that really becomes like the most important elements of anything, that you can do whatever you want, but you really have to start asking yourself questions about, okay, how much complexity am I adding and what is it delivering to the final experience, right? And having superheroes ducking and covering and trying to like slowly scale buildings that's not Marvel. It never has been, never will be. You know, they just don't do it. It's not a thing, right? So that then leads to like us being able to do things like a simplified line of sight system that also makes the game more accessible, which is great because Marvel is such a huge accessible point as well, right? We all know these characters. We all have feelings for certain characters or love the entire property. And so that's great, right? It's great when that stuff synergizes together well.
I now have this running image of Crossbones running up the side of a building that I can't get out.
Yeah, he would never have a grappling hook or some other type of thing. It's there's no way he would only use the stairs. That's just that man's
I'll
life.
admit, as soon as you said that, I did start looking. The closest thing I could find was a comic about like climbing Mount Everest, and like that's really not what he's talking about. Your logic is completely sound. I brought it up earlier, but like Midnight Suns is an XCOM game, or made by for Axis, and they also decided like cover doesn't really make sense here. It's like we have to redefine our formula for a superhero game, and you guys are all coming from different miniatures games, which I know have cover or true line of sight, or all of these concepts that I just like can like put the face to the name for, but have no idea what they actually mean. But yeah, no, like the system you have created, everything feels pretty intuitive. I've found very few, if any, things that are like, this feels wrong in this game. Like for a superhero game, it's very thematic, and that's like the intention, right? Like you guys have in multiple of your little like transmissions, you've talked about how you want the Hulk and Juggernaut to be throwing trucks at each other, and you can do that. There aren't any other games that can do that, so I like this game.
All right.
Cheers. Yeah, that's what I like to hear. Honestly, is people liking it. That's it, right? It is all about the fun, and again, it's subjective. Absolutely. Like I fully admit that everything we say here is just our opinions, man.
Oh yeah.
Like people don't have to agree with it, and that's fine. But we just, it's not gonna suddenly change. I guess is kind of like always the kicker. So,
I mean, speaking of like thematic moments and games that tell a story and kind of polarizing effects, Research Station, right? So the extract that's a secure, or how it gets referred to, it's one of my favorites so far as telling the story because it is so fun. You have that tug of war feel to it where it moves back and forth. But what was did that start as a secure? Was it always an extract? Was it something you picked up, or can you share what the development process was on that one?
I don't know if you remember this shit, because this definitely did not start as Research Station.
Oh, I do. This was the bus, wasn't it?
Yep.
This one started as the bus? Yeah, you had to escort the bus, and it was tug of war.
So. Yeah, so the theme of this got reskinned. This was sort of an interesting one because it started as a very different crisis, right? With a different theme and a different all this kind of stuff. And as we moved through it developmentally, we started talking about like, it did start as a secure, I'll tell you that. It started as not even close to what it is now. So like, don't even think like this was a secure and then they just oopsed it into an extract or something. No, that's not what happened. Look. Sometimes oopses happens. Okay, it's fine. That was not one of them. But no, this started with like, okay, well, we want to like rescue people. So how do we do that? Okay, well, we got this place. You got to bring a person, and then you can score points if you bring the person there. Okay, cool. Where do you get the people? Oh, well, there's these things. Okay, cool. So I go get the people. I show up at the thing. Hulk beats me up, takes my person, and puts him in the thing, and now it's his person. I'm like, well, that's weird. That's not a very fun game, because now I'm just delivering packages to someone else to score. And you're like, okay, well, that's not the best. So this was probably the longest development cycle on a Crisis we've ever done, because it just kept not working, and we tried all sorts of different things. We did all this kind of stuff, and we originally got to where it is now with it as a secure. And one of the problems with that, like, try it in one of your games, play it as your secure. Like, literally just take the Crisis, play it as your secure, and you're going to immediately see that it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because you pick up all the extracts, and then everybody dogpiles on the token, the one token that moves around. So what's the point of secures? The point of secures in the game is to spread people out.
Yeah.
Right. It's to make you occupy different spaces on the table while you fight each other. So if you only had a 1-point secure, which is basically what Research Station is, it can't be a secure. Right. It's not fulfilling its purpose. So generally speaking, as a philosophy, like, secure spread people out, extracts let you move while you score them. So this one, we said, hey, what if you try it as an extract? It's moving, and we do have some secures that move, right? We have the Terrigen Mist, we have the whatever the Mayor Fisk one is. So we do have secures that move, but not like this, right? And not like an extract, where you're still trying to get a specific point, and those move so slowly that it's possible, I guess, to get the 2 Terrigen Clouds together if you want, but like, it'll take 3 or 4 rounds, and it doesn't seem like a great idea.
You just letting them score every round, have to do that, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, it and both players have to kind of agree to it, right? Because I mean, I guess if you're like dominating the game, you could control both of them for multiple rounds in a row, but then you probably just won the game. So, like, did that even happen? I don't know. Anyways, so that was sort of how Research Station came about, is as an extract that is kind of a secure, is that it's not like, you're controlling the token like a secure, but it's not a secure at all, right? Like, it from a philosophy standpoint, it uses some of the mechanics of a secure, but it doesn't play like a secure. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh no, absolutely. That's honestly, that's the most simple answer that no one ever thought of, with how, like, but it makes complete sense. Like, every time I ever see anybody talk about Research, it's like, it's the extract that's a secure, and like, that point of view of it is just never brought up. It's just complaining.
I mean, I love to complain, so I get it. If Punisher complained more, it would be more like
Go. I'll pull you some runs, Pagani. Punisher likes to complain about a lot of things. He's got a lot of opinions.
We're lining up more and more every day.
For the most part.
All right. I guess, is there anything else that you guys would like to just mention about extract, or not extracts, but Crisis in general, before we move on to the next little bit?
Yeah, I think Crisis are one of the most important things in the game, and they're exciting for us to create because they can create such varied play things and experiences for players. So they're very hard to make. They're very fun to make. Yeah, that's just kind of my take on Crisis.
Awesome. All right, so the other topic we really wanted to hit was something that I think it's overlooked in the community largely, and that's understanding developer intent versus the player reality. And to kick this one off, I want to start with just like your guys' general thoughts. I have this really strong belief that a lot of crises and characters are designed with specific intents and play styles in mind. And then once the players get them, there is very much a different reality that happens with these characters. And people try getting crazy combinations and trying to break the meta and trying to do all sorts of things like this. I'm just curious, like, is this something that's actually you guys see from your perspective as well? Or like, am I just looking way too deep into the weeds on this one?
I mean, I think ultimately, right, we know that it's folly for us to be like, this is how this thing will play, and that's never the point. the way in which we approach it, again, it goes back to that early discussion of theme, right? If the character hits all of the right like check boxes for the theme of the character we want, it feels like the character, it lets players feel like they're living that fantasy of using that character on the tabletop, and then it poses interesting like options and opportunities and ways to like fit it in, then that's amazing. And then what testing is really for is it's to go, okay, how many different ways can this thing be broken, right? Not will it work the way that maybe I would use it or Pagani would use it, and I think your design challenges are a great example of this, right? Like Pagani's like, I always use blade with a lot of bleeders. And I maximized it that way and it worked really well for me, but we haven't really seen a lot of that in the community thus far, right? The point isn't that players are playing blade wrong because Pagani intended blade to have a lot of bleeders or that was the way he's supposed to work, quote unquote. It's that way doesn't break anything, right? It doesn't cause a degenerate play experience. And that's more of the bigger like hurdle is you give players this card full of options and opportunities and you say, okay, what can you do with it? And you fully expect them to do things immediately in ways that you've never expected. Instantly, right? Like we talk a lot internally about whenever something's previewed in public, the hot takes moment, we get a lot of hot takes moments, right? Like we make a character design and the rules get finished for it and we show it to our internal group, right? To the AMG folks who all like to playtest, like alpha playtest and stuff. And we get their hot takes. This thing's broken. This thing's worthless. This thing's really interesting. This seems like it's going to be the most powerful character ever in the game. And then we start playing with it. And a lot of times hot takes are just that. They're just takes and they prove to not be true to the greater or lesser extent. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And then you send the next step out to the playtesters. They do the exact same thing, right? All the hot takes. And then through play, some of those turn out to be kind of true. Some of them turn out to be completely false. I always love the ones where they're just like, this character is absolutely broken. I don't even need to play it. And then Pagani or Sarah come on in the little forums and they type very nicely, please play the character before giving feedback like this. And then they go and they play the character and they're like, okay, this character's not very good. It needs this and this. And I'm like, but I thought this character was broken. I'm confused now. And then you send it out to the community. You get the exact same thing, right? This character is completely overpowered. This character will never be used. And it's not until players start to play with it and they really start to like break things that you start to see how they do it. And the whole point of the game is to give players that control. I think talking about why we love miniatures games so much or tabletop in general, it's the fact that you get to solve your own puzzles, right? Like you get this collection of pieces and then you assemble them however you want to do things. And you get that moment of like success when you unlock something that no one else ever thought about, including maybe us. It's not our job.
Definitely maybe us, right? Like, there's no way we can find everything.
And it's not our jobs. Like our job is not to put things solidly on rails. Our job is to make sure that, all of the pathways don't lead to cliffs. Like they don't dead end, right? You don't crash into like a public building because that's where it terminates.
It's got dark.
I know. Look, disaster strikes, right? Like we just have to make sure everyone gets to the station that they want to go to safely. But how you get there is completely up to you. And so it just comes down to like, there is no developer intent outside of fun, right? Our intent is that the game stays healthy and that players have a lot of fun and that we're delivering on our theme. Like those are kind of like the three cornerstones of what we're trying to do anytime we make something. And then outside of that, it's like, however you do that, as long as you're not ruining someone else's fun, more power to you.
Maybe I have a different concept of developer intent.
But no, go for it.
To me, like, we definitely have intents on, like, when we make an X-Force character, we want them to be good in X-Force or whatever, right? Like,
X-Force?
So it's just an example. Calm down.
I was trying to be Dizzard, sorry.
Fair. But like, and the hope there is that those characters are that. So that's the intent. And does it always work out? No, it doesn't. Like, does it sometimes work out too well? Yeah, sometimes. But the hope there is that like Convocation, I think, is a great example of this, right? We created all of these mystic characters. We gave them specific tactic cards that work around mystic characters. We give them all these different things, and the hope is that you will play Convocation as Convocation. Now, obviously, Crisis Protocol is built in a way that you can take those characters and put them into any roster and anything you want. So we also want to give you those paths that you can take for those things, right? But I think there's always some hope that like you'll play X-Men, you'll play X-Force, you'll play Convocation, you'll play Dark Domain. Like you play each one of these little buckets that we've kind of made, and that each one of those is an option that you can pick as a player. And if you enjoy that option, you can play it. But I don't think there's ever really like the intent of like these three characters together, the optimal way to do this, right? Like that's not really what we ever think about or anything. So
all I heard was that Phantom X is going to be amazing.
I mean,
it's quite the takeaway.
Sure.
I don't know where
I may have blacked out for a moment, but I don't think I said that word.
No, you didn't. Not at all.
Sitting there like, wait, what?
We were talking about X-Force, and then like sometimes things are really good. I was like, oh, it's got to be that then.
Yeah.
You're connecting the dots on like a whole entire different level than anybody else here. It's like X-Force, Convocation, what's happening?
When I think of like the true hero of X-Force, it's always Phantom X, the most renowned X-Man ever created.
If you read Rick Remender's run, you would not be sarcastic right now. That dude rules. Although it's still Deadpool. Sorry.
Paint him in the white suit. Paint him in the white suit. You'll be fine.
All right. I'm gonna skip
White
this
suit
next
Deadpool.
question I had because you guys pretty much answered that as well. When it comes down to it, it's all about the theme, you know.
I do have several very important questions, but we can get to them later.
All right. Then
Or
remember... you could do it now.
That was totally not my intention. I'm just not trying to interrupt Izzard too much.
Oh, you're fine. So this one was during one of mini extravaganzas. You guys mentioned the bell curve, and it kind of goes back into like, what are your thoughts that this concept of the whole intent has an effect on the bell curve? But again, I guess you guys answered that one too. I should have read that before I started talking. Answered two questions in one.
I mean, you kind of touch on it, right? Like, shit, go ahead. You.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, when it really comes down to it, the thing I was gonna say is that we don't have an intent of like this character is gonna fall higher on the bell curve or this character is gonna be lower on the bell curve, right? We let that stuff just shake out. We're like, it's designed to be thematic and to fit the character. It's not on an outlier. It's not an outlier in terms of that. That's what testing does, right? We either bring the far end in or the bottom end up, or it winds up right somewhere in the middle, and that's great because then it's just little tweaks to make everything like more fun and thematic. But it's not like, well, this character clearly has to be on this end and this character will be on this end because of personal preference or like comic power level, right? Like that's not really taken into account ever when we're designing stuff. Like there's no intent behind how the bell curve works. It's that everything has to fall within the bell curve. And if in somebody's opinion, let's just say Captain Marvel as a 4 threat falls below Dr. Voodoo as a 4 threat in terms of their bell curve station, but neither one is breaking it, then that's fine. We never evaluate them that way, right? It's every once in a while we'll make a determination or something through playtesting, and we'll be like, well, this person's on the high end for this threat value, and a lot of time, 99 times out of 100, it's like, okay, that's fine. Because they're not breaking the curve, and it's more staying within the curve than it is where you fall on the curve.
Yeah, one of the to kind of latch onto that a little bit there for a minute. One of the interesting things about playtest is somebody will be like, "This guy's way too good," and you're like, "Okay, when you say way too good, do you mean like good or do you mean like broken?" Like, how many steps have we taken here, right? Because if they're just good, like, okay, cool. If they're broken, then obviously we got to do something about that. So it's always like an exciting time when playtest feedback comes back, and you're like, okay, let's talk about this without the hyperbole, right? Like, because we're all people, right? We all have our speech patterns and all the things that we say, right? We're all gamers, so they're always like, "This is literally the best thing that's ever been made." You're like, but is it really? Like,
sure?
no, not at all. Like, so that's always really interesting to me to kind of like, I guess, try to like pick through the feedback, and we get this from the community too, right? It's like, you said one thing, but what did you actually mean? Is a really interesting point, and I think that's something to think about when you hear us talk about characters on the bell curve and stuff. Is like, we believe, and we can certainly be wrong, right? But we believe that everything is inside of that curve, and that, for those of you that don't know, because we didn't really explain it at the beginning, is we talk about the bell curve, and every character fits on this curve, and the goal of it is to have it be the squishiest curve possible, but you never want it to be a perfect line, because then there's no variety in the game. You have no excitement. You have nothing like that, right? So those characters, every character fits on the curve, and the goal is to have the curve be as small as possible, because that's as close to balance as you can get. But attaining a single vertical line is one, bad, and two, impossible. So yeah.
It was like one of
We need to have our
our
hopes at the top.
It was like one of our first episodes. We talked about balance. We went through like the actual like definition. This one article talking about balance and how if you had a perfectly balanced game, that'd probably be the most boring game ever created.
Yeah, you know what? A coin flipping is perfectly balanced.
Yeah.
Right.
Whew.
Like,
I have no advantage in that game.
like, do you want to? Do you want that to be your game? Is just like,
let's go, bro.
I gotta die. I'll win on a 4+. That's the whole game. Like, perfectly balanced. Nobody wants that, right? So, yeah, you want players to be able to do things in the game to influence the outcome of the game. You want randomness so that it's not a perfectly solvable game. Like, yeah.
You want to contribute to
We're
the
down-
puzzle, not get rid of the puzzle.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, we could do an entire 5-hour podcast on game design and why balance isn't good, but we don't need to go into that.
Hyper Viper, you want to ask your question?
Oh, okay. Well, it's several questions. It's the, as you guys call it, the lightning round. So if any of these are like not okay questions, or you think they're just kind of silly or whatever, if you have any reason not to answer them, feel free not to. We can just move on. But is the trend of removing character through superpowers intentional? That move towards, if they're on the card, they are like attacks, like rogue, for example?
No, it's not intentional. I think like we've kind of shaken out to the fact that as the game has progressed and as we move forward, not every character can have a throw, and there's a lot more understanding of how throws impact the game. So they may not be quite as loosey-goosey as they were at the start, but there's also this intention at the front end to really, because again, if we go back to like, what are the three main points of that initial design, right? Number 2 was things need to get thrown. So if you want that to be a core thing of your game, and for players to see that right away, you kind of lean more heavily into it, right? You're just like, okay, everybody has to have a throw or a push effect or something. And so you kind of see this false increase at the start, and a lot of characters were picked or designed around their moments where they could do that. And then as you get going, it's like, okay, well, now we're diving into characters like, let's just say Daredevil and Iron Fist and Taskmaster and Bullseye. Like, none of those characters make, like, if you put a throw on them just to put a throw on them, it wouldn't make any sense, right? Like,
gotcha.
It would just feel kind of pushed. So there is an ebb and flow of like, what characters are you using or are we looking at, right? What's our wave look like? And then how do they impact into Marvel itself, or the Marvel like universe and power structure itself? Because you have to make sure the characters are thematic, and Daredevil isn't throwing dumpsters at people. Like, that's just not him. So I think that's part of it too, is it's just like, as you look at these different characters, you're going to wind up seeing kind of an ebb and flow of these different abilities. You could ask the same question about Infinity Gems. Like, how long was it until we saw new characters that could take Infinity Gems? It was the new Black Order characters. And that's because, well, I mean, I guess conceivably you could slap an Infinity Gem on anybody you wanted, because anybody in the comics can use them effectively. We want to make sure that anybody who has one has a very specific reason to have one, right? Like, that it makes thematic sense in terms of the Crisis Protocol narrative, which is drawing so heavily from the comic book narrative. And so we don't just because a thing exists doesn't mean we're going to slap it on there to make sure that it gets like representation in the game going forward from its initial wave. So it's a combination of things, right? It's being more knowledgeable about the power level of throws, but also just kind of how character choices and where the game has branched out to and grown into, which I think is a lot of characters who just don't have that physical capability to be like throwing fools around quite as readily as the Hulk. But there are characters that, you know, are on the horizon that will bring all that stuff back, and you're going to start seeing that.
Okay.
I'm sure Pagani can talk about specifically the choice between when a throw becomes part of an attack versus part of a superpower, because now you're talking about action economy, and that's part of that. Like, how much does it impact the game, and where does it balance out?
All right, thank you. I'm happy to have that answer because it also tells me why Hood can't hold the power gem, even though he did that once in the comics.
Yeah, just not the right version of Hood, right? Like Hood.
Very much so, yeah.
And also, like, when you think of Hood, right, you don't think of the power gem, right? But like when you think of Black Order, you think of Infinity Stones a lot, right? So
okay.
I'm actually kind of curious about the throw superpower.
This is the worst lightning round ever.
I'm trying to keep going.
You brought it up, and then I was like, I really.
I thought you were just going to say no to the answer to the question.
No, we just move on. That'd be good too. I mean, the next like 3 are definitely just like yes or no questions, basically. So we can spend some more time on this one. You guys want to or do you want to keep going? Okay, yeah, okay. Continuing on. Can I get a word of God confirmation that the Hulk in the game that we have right now is pre-core breach? If that's a little bit too wordy, it's pre-Planet Hulk before he gets that big core that he absorbs that makes him all big and monstrous.
Yes, that is accurate.
All right, next one is who are your personal favorite characters in traditional media in game? Obviously restricted to Marvel.
Oh, I think we already answered that one.
Kind of did, but in game as well. We're getting both.
Oh, well, I said Magneto already, and I'm going to stick to it.
Magneto's really cool.
That's your only answer?
It's my only answer.
Really cool.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me go through the list here. Let me think. I think one of the big galaxy brain moments for me with the game and what it could do in terms of like relationships to characters from the comics, MODOK was definitely one. MODOK is not a character that to me is anything more than like kind of a goofy, like he's a goofy mustache twirler. You know, he shows up and he does his MODOK thing, but even when creative teams really try to lean into like the terror that MODOK should be, the fact that he's this, you know, heavily modified, insane supercomputer human who basically just annihilates anything that makes him mad. When you watch like the animations, and because he just looks kind of goofy, he gets played for laughs a little bit more. So to me, it was like, I like MODOK. To me, he is one of the most Marvel of Marvel characters because he's so unique in design and just visual presence. But it's not a character that I like gravitate towards. But getting to put him into the game and realizing what he could unlock. I mean, he was the first character with mystic attacks, right, in that initial core set, and so he was one of the very first characters with mystic attacks that we started playtesting with, and really like helping define like what does that attack type mean, and how does a psionic or a telepathic character work in the game, right? Like him moving characters around, and can you take control of other characters, or do you just kind of like manipulate them in certain ways, and power manipulation and stuff. Like the more we dove into that, the more I became like in love with MODOK, right? Like he became so cool in the game that I started to really like the character more beyond what I did in the comics. And there have been other characters like that as well that, you know, you kind of like you throw in and you're like, okay, we're going to do this character. There's a lot of people who really love this character. They may not be a personal favorite, but you get to see them kind of shine on the tabletop in ways that speak to you. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the character for me. I love this character now. And I love watching that in the community, right? Like seen people who were like, who the hell is this Cassandra Nova character? Why would they do this? And then having them go do the research or start to look at, like, have people come and be like, no, she's a really great character. You got to go look at this Hickman run. You got to go look at this. And discover characters in a new light. Like, that was always, to me, one of the most exciting things about the chance to work on the game, was to be able to do that. And I think it works both ways, right? Like, absolutely, there are characters that I personally have a lower like investment in when it comes to the comics, but then in the game, all of a sudden I'm like, this is really cool. And I will fully admit that, like, well, I understand why everyone loves Hood. Hood to me was another one of those characters where I was just like, he's kind of neat. Like, I kind of get it. But then we started to really get into his design and his transformation mechanic. And like, now I take Hood a ton of my lists, because I just want to transform into a demon and rip somebody's face off. Like,
that demon side spender's amazing.
Really fun, yeah.
It's just so cool, and the miniature looks like baller as hell, and it was super fun to paint. And so now I find myself like, if I see a run that like has Hood in it, I'm more inclined to be like, yeah, let's read this. Let's check this out, because I found this attachment point to the character, and it informs like how I'm building my lists and the cool things I want to do on the tabletop with him. So I think it absolutely does work that way. And Hood and MODOK would be kind of like my first two that jump to mind, but I'm sure there's more. I mean, we have over 100 characters now released, and so many more that we've been working on. Like, it's nuts.
Oh boy. Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm also a big MODOK lover. Hood has earned a bit more love from this game as well. He just, like, all the transforming characters are so fun to play. Miss Marvel is another pocket favorite of mine. Moving on though, who is your favorite Rogue Agents host, and why is it me?
Well, I mean, obviously it's because you ask questions in a lightning round, but then allow the lightning round to be completely derailed by the nonsense of your other co-hosts, which means that you're a man of fortitude, but also patience. And that is a rare combination that is important in our modern society of rapid reactions and TikToks.
That's very apt. Thank you. That's the end of the lightning round, pretty much. I have a goofy question that's more just being like, funny rule interaction. Why does this work? But we can just skip that one. Let's keep going.
Oh no, you can't tease me with that and not.
You want this? All right, fine.
She's taking all of these questions.
Why can Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, whatever you want to call her, the mightiest mortal apparently, use her webs to pull around Dormammu and the Hulk?
They're strong webs.
Thank you.
I have a better rules question for you, which is, why does Thunderwave hurt Captain America?
Look, you're in charge. You can change these things.
I could, but will I?
I don't know. Apparently it bugs you too. And I did think that was a very interesting rules question. Like, why are they saying this card that nobody uses has a negative effect? But hey, I'm not you, so.
That's how the rules are written, so that's how they work.
The rules are written. All right.
I mean, to answer your Spider-Man question, that's how the rules are written.
You're correct. You've got strong webs.
That's why.
All right.
Thank you for that.
I want to circle back around to the whole action economy throw superpower thing for Pagani. Mm-hmm. I have to ask, as Chick mentioned, I could ask you, so I have to ask.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing point, right? You see a lot of superpowers nowadays getting more actions tied to them because they were too good without them. We've seen it on Enchantress, right? Once we added that action onto that, it became less of an issue. Why is that? Well, I mean, I'm sure you guys could do an entire podcast as to why spending an action to steal a token versus not spending an action to steal a token is more balanced or more reasonable.
Yes.
But yeah, and it's the same thing for these things. Like throw superpowers versus throw attack actions, right? One, the attack action usually costs more power. Two, throwing characters is very powerful, so being able to do it as a third free action is very good. And then also, obviously, throwing characters into other characters is kind of double dipping on the throw mechanic, whereas throwing terrain at characters, you only damage one character at a time. So it's if we're looking at a character and we say, hey, this character needs a little bit more damage output, they get a terrain throw. If we're saying, hey, this character needs a little bit more control, they get a character throw or a push or something like that, right? And then if it's characters that specifically throw characters at people, like Rogue, for example, you see a lot of times where she'll pick somebody up and throw them into a group of other people or things like that, they get character throws versus pushes. So like there's this whole dynamic of like, how do they displace people? Is it a teleport? Is it Lockjaw teleporting someone? Is it a push? Is it Shuri's Panther Gauntlets, for example, right? Or is it just like literally throwing people into crowds? It can be a throw then. And then the debate of attack versus superpower is how good is the character, not fictionally how good is the character, like how in the game good is the character. Does it need to be toned down? Does it need to be brought up? Does it make sense, right? Like that kind of stuff. So when you see characters that are like, I punch you and you go flying, that's an attack, like every time, right? If it's I literally like judo throw you or something, then it can be a throw or things like that, right? If it's like very intentionally throwing people, like Juggernaut, for example. Juggernaut's not like the punch you when you go flying kind of guy. He punches down into the ground a lot and not
Juggernaut punch. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like so he gets the tactic card that lets him throw people.
Yeah. So like guess kind of a follow-up question. I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. Colossus. I guess the way that I could look at this is, and like for everybody to kind of look at him, is like you kind of designed him more of an aspect of like being that big brother, let me take everything hit, not the aggressive Colossus that everybody was expecting or says that they wanted.
He's a gentle soul.
Yeah, I mean, like with Colossus also, this goes back to our initial conversations about like theme and then the intent, and this is the Pagani kind of intent of, you look at characters within the affiliations that they are primarily designed for or expected to play in, right? Like the X-Men, the Uncanny X-Men specifically, are always looked at in terms of like each. If you read the X-Men comics, you watch the movies, like their whole idea is teamwork, right? They are each individual parts, and by coming together they are able to overcome like massive obstacles, despite the fact that like literally every founding member is an Omega level mutant, which means that they don't need friends, right?
Yeah.
But yet here we are where they all need their team, right? They can't function like a Magneto by themselves. They rely on that team building aspect. So when it came time to kind of look at the Colossus and what do we want out of Colossus, he was always, that initial one was always very much earmarked as he's the protector, right? He's the one who takes the hits, can survive the hits to let the other teammates do their thing. And, you like subjectively, you can be like, well, that's not the Colossus I wanted. That doesn't, did it hit? Did it not hit? We can debate that forever. And, everyone will have their opinions on it. But those are some of like, it's a good example of like, okay, you can go a lot of different ways with these characters. But Colossus is the guy who stands in the way of the thing that will take out his teammates. And he is that big brother, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean that we won't see like a Super Bruiser X-Force style Colossus in the future? Absolutely not. There's so much room to explore so many things with these characters.
I think it's also worth talking about the development process a little bit here. Colossus was designed and developed around the same time as both Luke Cage and Lizard. So we have Luke Cage, Lizard, and Colossus all being worked on at the same time. How do you make them different from each other, right? Lizard got the push, Luke Cage got the throw, Colossus got being super tanky, like and never dies, right? So that's sort of the like very high level discussion there, right? Is that kind of stuff. So, and I remember Colossus originally his throw could throw characters, and one of the problems with Colossus in testing was like he just literally does everything, right? He's not particularly fast, right? But like once he gets there, you're not getting him off the point, and he can beat one person up and then throw the other one. So now he wins 2-on-1s, and he just doesn't die. And
sounds great.
It's just really, really powerful. So, and I mean, Lizard has a little bit of that in him, right, with the push and stuff. And Luke Cage is still durable, but not as durable because of other things around him.
But Lizard can like barely hurt you, like hopefully, unless like dice do dice things. He's like not designed to be a murder machine.
Exactly, right. So like Luke Cage got a little bit more offense. Luke Cage also has the stagger on his normal attack, right? It's not likely to happen, but it can happen.
I mean, you say that, but
yeah, like well, everybody's got that story where Luke Cage rolled up and ruined someone's day. Okay, everybody has those
stories because Luke Cage is one of my favorite characters in this game.
Yeah, like it's just he's so like finding ways to differentiate those three characters that were all very similar in concept of highly durable character, very tanky. All of them are pretty good fighters, right? Like none of them are like pushovers, right? When it comes to punching. So like, how do you make these three characters? And that's how we made these three characters.
Yeah, I'm a big pusher when it comes to Colossus. I keep telling people like when you're sleeping on him, especially right now after the rotated and the standard. Like I think he is extremely good in the new standard format, just because of the fact that you don't have field dressing, you don't have med pack. Like he helps out with that longevity so much. So I'm a fan of him how he is. I think he's at like I said earlier, he's that big brother. He's there to protect everybody. I think it's great for how he is.
He's a tank.
And I mean, some of that comes down to like how you prioritize your play styles. I know internally, one of our devs, Andrew Dursum, is like a huge proponent of the durability that you can get out of a Defenders affiliation roster. And he plays them very differently from how everyone else plays them. But when he plays them in the way that he does, his characters never die. Like they just last and last and last. But he doesn't do a lot of damage in return, right? It's more he just outlasts and is able to do other things to score the objectives faster than you can. And it becomes this very like tanky kind of turtle approach to the game. And that's just something that he likes to do. Whereas I think a lot of players prioritize, speed at grabbing objectives or damage output and those kinds of things. So if you want to play in an aggro uncanny X-Men list, Colossus is not going to be your bro. That's not really what he does. So there's those considerations as well. And that goes back to the fact that like you have all these options. It's up to you as a player to figure out how to utilize them. And there's no better kind of marker of the fact that a game is well balanced than when you go into something and people are like, what's the best character? And everyone argues about who the best character is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you'll see ones that come up more often than others, but then you'll see ones where people are like, that character's terrible. Then the person be like, this is the best character I use. Like, and it always comes through for me, but I use them in this way because I'm trying to do these things, whereas you're trying to do these things. And I think that's another part of the really important like personal expression and why we get so passionate about these games, because you have the power.
Oh yeah. Like what do you think is good or define good are usually our local groups kind of follow up when new players ask like, oh, well, what's good in this game? It's like, well, it's not 40K. So like, what do you think is good? What do you like? And let's talk about that. Like, who's your favorite characters? Let's start there.
Like, what do you want out of your characters? Like, what do you want them to be able to do?
And that philosophy goes right back to that. It goes right back to that bell curve, right? If you're doing the bell curve properly, you get those conversations. If you do the bell curve improperly and it gets too wide, now those conversations can't happen. And that's kind of like the driving force behind why we're so focused on the curve being tight, not everything having an order necessarily, right? Because people like to talk about, well, that's a high value 3 and that's a low value 3 and that's a mid 3. And I'm like, okay, but what does that really matter? Like, what does that really mean? Like, how efficiently are you playing the character? Like, if you play a low value 3 super efficiently, it will always beat a high value 3 played inefficiently, like flat out, right? And if it's not, then I think we have an issue when it comes to the development of the playtest cycle. But that's when we step in and we fix it if we absolutely have to.
Okay. So something else that we do on the show is we call it like the elevator pitch or the sales pitch, and basically you get a good 2 to 5 minutes of talking about a model that you think is underrepresented across the community, or just something you want to talk about. And since Pagani did the challenge of the week, Shik, do you want to take this one?
Oh my gosh, there's so many characters, and then I have to make sure I pick one that's actually released.
Yep. I'm hoping you mess up, not gonna lie.
It's a trap.
But then I just get told to edit it out.
Let me think about this. I will cheat a little bit. Because I'm going to talk about something that's not yet released, though it's coming super soon, but we have shown off. So I'm going to talk about Winter Guard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of conversation about about what they do and where do they fit in the game and are they exciting, are they not exciting? There's a bear, that's very exciting. I agree. anytime there's a bear, like it already gets like 10 bonus points.
True.
So my elevator pitch for Winter Guard is like, do you want to play an affiliation that is just like an immovable red tide? They like, if you like to control the battlefield and have very reliable, not flashy, but very reliable like outcomes, the Winter Guard really excel at being like that stalwart force that just, you can't move them. You know, like they don't particularly have like all of the fancy gadgets. They don't particularly have all the flashy abilities, but when you synergize them correctly with all their tactic cards and what they do, they play the objective game extraordinarily well, and they are very difficult to remove. They're like an Alabama tick. They just dig in and you cannot get them out, you know? And I think that they offer, for me, they offer this really interesting like flip to the Avengers, whereas the Avengers are very flashy. You know, you've got your I can do this all days, you've got your unibeams, you've got your going binary with Captain Marvel, your flippy flips with Spider-Man. Like the Avengers are kind of show-offs. And I think the thing that was fun about the Winter Guard, and one of the things that makes them really exciting about playing, is that the Winter Guard are really, they look basic, but once you dig in and you start using them, they become really efficient. And they do things super well without needing a lot of flash. So you kind of get those moments and where, like, you know, somebody comes in and they do all their fancy stuff and they're like, look at me go. And you're like, I'm just going to do this very basic thing. And then you beat them and you're like, I guess that was really stupid, wasn't it? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. You know, it's that moment where the character's doing like all the backflips, and or like the Indiana Jones moment where the swordsman comes out and starts spinning his sword and all the crazy stuff. And Indiana Jones is like, pat, you know, because Harrison Ford got food poisoning and didn't want to do the choreography. It's like, what if I just shoot him? Because that's what I should do. That's the Winter Guard. Like, that was the experience with the Winter Guard. It's like they don't do anything super flashy, but they just work. They put in work. And for me, I think that was really fun and exciting. And I'm really interested to see the players that like gravitate towards that and start to unlock that potential, like how that impacts everything else, because they are very different in that way, where they don't look exciting, but they are really fun to play on the tabletop because they're just kind of this inexorable force that just does what they do. And as a smaller affiliation, you know, they're not gonna dominate your roster. So they make a really good like secondary affiliation. And I think a lot of their characters have pretty good effects in other affiliations if you want to like start mixing things up, you know. If you want to run a Winter Guard Avenger force and be kind of weird and have Crimson Dynamo running around with Avengers, like that can be pretty good. For me as a thematic player, like I would match them with Cabal or maybe Hydra or possibly Criminal Syndicate. And I think that they balance some of what those affiliations struggle with a little bit in really good ways. And a lot of the characters that cross over that you would pull from your roster that wouldn't be affiliated can fit really well with the Winter Guard, or the Winter Guard can fit really well with them. You know, Criminal Syndicate is a really good one because the Winter Guard they're pretty chunky, like Crimson Dynamo and the Bear and stuff. So already, you know, players like, they'll be great in Criminal Syndicate. I'm like, yeah, but a lot of Criminal Syndicate stuff is really great with Winter Guard. Like, give it a try. It's pretty nutso. That's my elevator pitch. You know, don't always look for the bells and whistles. Sometimes you just need a really reliable vehicle that's never going to break down.
I like it. You know? Oh, that's title of the episode right there.
Really reliable vehicle.
Something like that. I don't know yet. I will say I'm actually, and I've been talking about it ever since I saw the pictures of Dynamo's card. I was like, I will be running Winter Force. I try to make everything work. I can't help it.
I don't think we've shown the tactic cards yet.
No, we haven't seen those.
And those
yet.
are exciting.
That's why I was trying not to say anything about that, because he said the tactic cards, like, ooh, okay, those have got to be cool. they sound interesting.
They're pretty cool. So look out for those.
We look forward to it.
I mean, that's been like a running theme with a lot of, not even recent character releases, but releases in general, is like and I'm guilty of this myself. When Juggernaut came out, I'm like, oh, why doesn't Juggernaut have a throw? Juggernaut should be able to throw stuff. And then his card comes out, I'm like, oh, Juggernaut has a throw. That's dope.
Has one of the best throws in the game.
I think it's the only throw long.
Well,
for
only character throw long.
for
Yeah,
character throw. Yeah.
And that's been I think that's been like kind of one of the another big aha moments. You know, we talked a little bit about how throws and their evolution over the course of the game in terms of their balance value and what we do with them and stuff. Like, I think one of the fun things that we've become better and better at understanding is, tactic cards and what they bring to our ability to make the characters feel more thematic, to make the game more thematic, and also to unlock things that we really want the character to be able to do. But if the character has access to them all the time, it breaks the curve. Like Juggernaut originally had that throw on his card. He was just, it was not okay. It wasn't long. To be clear, it wasn't long. Okay. It was never long. It was never long, but he could just access it all the time.
Yeah.
And basically it made him too efficient and too good at everything. So, then the conversation became, okay, well, what can we cut? What is okay to cut? Where is his thematic core located? And, it wasn't really the throw, but we knew we wanted him to have the throw. I think at one point the throw wound up being on his injured side only, but that was still like problematic. And so through the process, we kind of just came to the fact that what if we just gave him the most amazing throw in the game, but he can only use it once, right? And it takes up a tactic card slot, which has a huge opportunity cost to it. So you have to balance against that. And those kinds of things have really let us dial in and make the character's design and development even better and more exciting. And, with the rotation, also make, I think, tactic card choice much more interesting and also exciting for players, because rather than focusing on really bland, but always powerful effects that don't really tell the story, you now are making very interesting and unique gear, quote unquote, choices for your characters. Like, do you want Juggernaut to be able to have that super awesome throw once per game? Or do you want, Magneto to be able to magnetic crush and blow up the world? Those might come down to be your options, right? Like, and magnetic crush is another one that was originally that was just an attack. Yeah. Magneto always had.
Oh my god!
But got turned into a tactic card because it was like bonkers crazy, and it was a lot of text that didn't fit on the card. So, it's those types of things. And I think like that becomes a really interesting, it's just another dial that we get to turn and mess with when it comes to character designs, and then the overall like roster construction and player choices, right? The more we can make players disagree about what the best roster is, the more excited I am.
That's a fair statement. It just means that everything's good, right?
Yeah, it just means like there's no right answer, and that's what you want in a fun living game, right?
Yeah, you don't want to go to an event and see everybody playing the same exact list. You don't want see table A and table B and it's Malekith versus Malekith.
Yeah,
it's good.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen because they're wrong.
No, but the last three roster slots are like the hardest ones for me, because usually it's really easy for like the core of like an affiliation, or like I love these characters, so it's like a core and some guys that I love, and then it's like, well, now I need like these role player characters, and it's so hard to pick which roles you want to fill, especially as the characters just expand and expand and expand. They got 93 choices.
Sort of going back to the like discussion about like Lizard versus Luke Cage versus Colossus, right? Like if you want that tanky, slow character that's going to sit at a point, which one do you pick? I mean, and they're not even the only three, right? There are other ones. You could take Captain America. You could take like that choice is always very interesting to me, and seeing how players shake out on that is always very interesting to watch.
Awesome.
I used to just fill those slots with gems, but then you guys took that away from me.
It was specifically because of you, actually.
That's for you.
That's why we're here. We made that rule specifically for you.
Thank you. No, it was a very good change for what it's worth.
Yeah.
hard to adapt to, but a really good change.
That's how you know it's a good one.
Yeah, that's the best kind of, like, even with the new rotation initially, I was like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. But the more I played it, I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's like the stuff that you have to really think about is good.
I love the new rotation because you see so many of the character cards being played nowadays.
Yeah.
Like all the generic cards are just like, I don't care so much anymore. Let me play with all my
Yeah, or they're
character cards
restricted.
that are cool. Yeah, like
Mhm.
I love the BNR change. It's great. Yeah.
I was in the same boat because like I was just so tired of playing field dressing every game.
That's true.
Honestly, if we kind of maybe let that one go a little bit too long because we were like, the rotation's coming. It's coming. We don't need to ban it. It's fine. So
There are those moments where you're just like, it's not worth rocking the boat when you know you're going to tip it over like shortly. So you're just like,
Right.
yeah, we'll just let them have it a little bit longer and then rotation.
Rug pull. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think we should start wrapping up here. Is there any last minute things you guys would like to share with the community and listeners of the show?
I mean, I think like the only thing that I'll say is, you know, we have a lot of fun doing what we get to do, and it's super awesome to watch the community kind of like adapt and grow and come up with crazy things that make us go, well, that wasn't intended, but hey, that's awesome to see. And you know, like end of the day, right? My thing is always just as much fun as it is to do your side of it. The thing that makes these games amazing is it's a communal effort. So you can't play the game without someone else, right? So
Yeah.
you should always be focused on like your fun and the other person's fun, because that's what matters. And so it's a dialogue and it's a social environment, and you know, if you keep those two things in mind, you're always going to have a blast.
be excellent to each other.
Be
In
excellent
short.
to each other. The original TED Talk, right there.
All right. Well, it's fun. Thank you guys for coming out and joining us today on the show, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and come on with us. And we hope to eventually someday be able to do this again.
I'm
Absolutely.
sure we can make that happen.
Thanks so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for all you do with, you know, giving the community a place to go and have good discussions and all that great stuff. So looking forward to being here again sometime in the future with new things to discuss.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Maximum effort.
In this war, there's no surrender.
He's out of line, but he's right. Who the hell is Bucky?
You don't like a fair fight.
I think you're wrong. Which part? All of it.
You think you're the only superhero in the world?
Touche.
Okay.